Welcome to This Week in Habsland. I am Jordan, and I'm joined by my co-host Brian, and we are here each Monday to discuss all things Montreal Canadiens. As usual, you can find us on social media on Twitter and TikTok at HabslandPod. So, Brian, the Canadiens nearly accomplished a pointless week, and there's a lot of panic in the streets, a lot of people getting worried. Before we get into anything, what did you think of these past three games against Pittsburgh, the Los Angeles Kings, and the New York Islanders?
Jordan, these were not good games. I think we all know that. Going 0-2-1 this early in the season when a lot of people, I think, have hopes of playoffs, it's not a good sign, let's say, and the way in which they lost, I would say all three of these games was not that promising. There's one just like beam of pure, beautiful sunlight coming through, though, one positive thing that I want to talk about. The Canadiens scored a goal against the Los Angeles Kings, Jordan. We lost 4-1 instead of 4-0.
Yeah.
So we broke that. I don't know if we should do a streak of the week segment, because last week we broke two. One of them, which I just forgot to say, which was the Ottawa beating us 9 games in a row. We finally beat them. We finally scored against the Los Angeles Kings. We lost 4-0 twice last year. Lost 4-1 this time. There's improvement there. I love that. All in all, it was not a good game. The Islanders game losing in shootout, that was not fun. One cool thing that happened this week, just to throw it in there because I don't think we'll get a chance to talk about it elsewhere, David Savard played his 800th game.
Yep.
That was very, very cool this week. So against the LA Kings, Savard plays his 800th game. They honor him. The Bell Center claps for him. Hey, that's awesome. And then 3 seconds later, the Habs get scored on in true Montreal Canadiens fashion. Honor a player, distract the team for about 3 seconds, and that's just enough for everybody to not wake up in time and react to what's going on. So that was nice to honor Savard and crappy to get scored on right after.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up because, yes, we're about to get mostly doom and gloom, I think, for the next hour. But I did want to bring that thing about Savard. I don't think a lot of people know this, and I'm 90% sure I'm correct on this. When an NHL player reaches 800 games, they have maxed out their NHLPA pension. So
cool.
We tend to celebrate 1,000 games because it's 4 figures. It's a kind of a bigger deal. But really, if you're asking the players, it's probably 800, where I think it's in 20 or 25 game increments that certain percentage of their pension is reached. So when a player hits 100 games, 125 games, 150 games, it goes up a level each time and maxes out at 800. Completely random thing that I learned maybe a month ago, and I've been waiting for the 800 game mark of him, and I believe Mike Matheson is also around that number. So congrats on maxing out your pension in your mid-30s. You're doing better than the rest of us. So let's look, it was a crappy week. Let's get into it.
Yeah,
in part 2 of the podcast, we're calling it a panic meter. You know, I don't like to use those words, especially in October, but we're going to talk specifically about some players. Then we're going to try to keep it at least on maybe the negative end, maybe a bit more team specific in part 1 in our headlines. So Brian and I were going back and forth a little bit over what we wanted to talk about, what headlines, and we kind of got to a point where we had almost opposing headlines, like our first headline of the week. So what we're going to try this week is kind of have a dueling headlines segment, just for the first one here, because I do think it's the same issue. The team has been playing very poorly, but I have one outlook on it. Brian has another. It might surprise people who has which outlook. So I'll go with my headline first, and I'll just,
please.
This is a saying that people mess up all the time. I might be messing it up right now, but it's don't lose the forest for the trees. I think there was a lot of people, especially on Thursday night, panicking during the 5th game of the NHL season about a team that we did not think was ever going to make the playoffs this season, freaking out. And I'm just saying, yes, they're playing poorly, but don't lose sight of what we're really trying to move forward. So my headline is don't lose the forest for the trees, i.e. don't panic already. Brian, what is your view what is your version of this headline that you want to present?
So although I agree with you, that's an important point, Jordan, I want to jump to, I guess, an opposing view. I think you're right. My headline is team defense is losing us important games. And I want to just address, before we start debating anything, I want to address the important games aspect of my headline first, as I think a lot of listeners, and probably you, are thinking, important games, we're 2 weeks into the season. These games aren't that important. If this team has any hopes of making the playoffs, which I think is what they definitely hope for. We all hope for, unless you're still a member of the perpetually depressing and boring Tank Nation. But if they have hopes to do it, they have to be much better than NHL 500 to start the year, because the way the Habs schedule is laid out this season, we play against Eastern Conference wildcard battlers, I'm calling them, teams that are on the playoff bubble in the East. We play them 14 times in the first half of the year and only 10 times in the back half. And a lot of those 14 are right at the start of the season. That's like Pittsburgh, Islanders, Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo, Philly, and Washington, I would put in there. Those 7 teams. We play them much more at the start of the season than at the end. And those are the all-important 4-point games that the Habs have to win to have any hopes of making the playoffs over them. Right? You win one of these games, they don't get those 2 points and you do. That's a 4-point game. We're currently 1-1-1 in those matchups. We beat Ottawa, we got spanked by Pittsburgh, and then we just lost in shootouts to the Islanders. So my point of view here is, and I'm going to talk about the team defense as well, because that was part of the headline, right? Team defense is losing us important games, but at least on the important games aspect, yes, we're very early in the season, but it just so happens the way the schedule for the Canadiens works this year, a lot of the important games are actually right at the start of the season, so they had to come out of the gates very strong.
And on that point, this is something that you and I have talked about offline. In addition to who they are playing right now, the schedule is actually quite forgivable through until the usual holiday trip that the Canadiens go on towards the end of December. So it's something like 32, 33 games. And then the schedule from that point onwards in late December, I'm just going to rattle off the games who they're playing, starting on December 28th. Florida, Tampa, Vegas, yes, Chicago, Colorado, Vancouver, Washington, Dallas, Utah, Dallas, Toronto, Rangers, Tampa, Detroit, Devils, Winnipeg. And then, the schedule it does peter off a little bit. But that's about a 5-week stretch where there's like 2 games where you think the Canadiens might be the favorite in.
And even then, like playing against Chicago, the Habs play down to their opposition in years past. I hope that's not the case this year, but they could play down to Chicago in that game. Sorry, keep going, Jordan.
Well, I'm just saying, like, in addition to who they're playing right now, the schedule definitely turns around the new year. And if there is any hope of this team still trying to crack 90 points, it needs to be greater than point per game before they head into that stretch. They got to have had, again, I think it's about 34 games, maybe 42 points, 40 points they want to be at least. Build a little bit of a lead there, because those are some hard games. I didn't say like road versus home, but quite a few of them are on the road. So the schedule does get harder. So please, now continue now and keep going into it. Keep spewing all your negativity and tell me why the team is terrible through their team defense specifically.
Well, I mean, I could go into the stats, Jordan. Like, I could talk about the amount of high danger scoring chances against. I could talk about face-off percentage in the defensive zone, especially. But I think the eye test is enough, because I would assume most of our listeners don't look at stats as closely as we do. Either they don't care about them as much, or they just don't have to because they don't have to talk about them. But the eye test is enough. How many times in the Pittsburgh game was a veteran Pittsburgh member, including Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, one of the very smart Pittsburgh forwards, able to just sort of sneak in to the slot and not get covered? The lapses in coverage, especially in that game, it extended to the Islanders game. The LA game was similar, though they play a sort of different style of offense. But against the Islanders and Pittsburgh especially, the amount of missed coverages and slot shots, so high danger scoring chances against, was appalling. And you didn't need stats to see that. The eye test was enough. And that happened often. That's basically the reason that Pittsburgh spanked us. They scored 6 goals against us, and a few of those were lapses in coverage. And it's not from the young guys either only. Like Lane Hutson, it wasn't just Lane Hutson. It was the veterans too. And so that's why it's more of a team defense issue rather than a specific player or a couple of specific players having trouble defensively. And then I also thought the urgency in leaving the defensive zone was still a problem. We talked about that week 1, so we don't have to address it again in detail, but a severe lack of urgency, I think, everywhere on the ice, but especially in the defensive zone when you're trying to break out. That's how you get hemmed in for like 3-4 minutes like the Islanders did to us.
So, yeah, breaking the forecheck and getting out of the defensive zone, like transitioning from your defensive zone coverage into your breakout, I think still remains the team's biggest issue from like a team-wide perspective. And I was trying to figure out this week, okay, look, there's 3 possible reasons for why this is failing. One is scheme. is that are they executing the scheme properly? 2 is like player skill with regard and like discipline and understanding the scheme, and 3 is player effort. So number 2, I should not be an issue because they need to be getting coached properly. I think they hopefully are. So it's either scheme or effort. And I think it's a combination of the two. You see someone like Justin Barron in, I think it was still late in the third period or maybe in overtime on Saturday night against the Islanders. Like and we'll talk about Barron later in the episode. He had a play late in the third period or overtime where just really soft off the boards. Like the Canadiens I'm noticing it more than this year than last year. The way they're trying to clear the puck is a lot of reverse cycling to get it to the other side and hoping that the other defenseman or one of the forwards are in the right spot to get the puck. And still at that point, half the time someone's going to be on their backhand and there's still no proper play for, ideally what you'd want would be a forward coming up the middle of the ice and giving a real short pass option. But the Canadiens are struggling with that still right now. So from an eye test standpoint, yes, they're failing. We can do the stat stuff. They're last in the NHL in shot attempt percentage. They are last in the NHL in expected goal differential. I think they are tied for 5th most times shorthanded. So now there's a different number of games played across the league, but point is they're a very heavily penalized team. And that was really, I think, what took them out of the Islanders game on Saturday night. They were playing pretty well. I mean, from an advanced stat standpoint, that was the first time that they were approaching a 50% Corsi or better in a game this season. And yes, I know the penalty kill stuff, that's not part of the 5-on-5 Corsi, but ultimately, like from like an eye test standpoint, that really sucked the energy out of the game. So that's all the negative stuff. What I will say to let's add all the context now, right? Like, yes, they have been poor. You can be bad and also have this context here. They have 3 rookies on the roster, and I think they're all playing pretty well. Emil Heineman, Oliver Kapanen, and Lane Hutson. Hutson might be the best player on the team right now.
Yep.
He is certainly in the top 5 in terms of performance so far this season. The bottom 6 is more than carrying its weight, which is absolutely shocking. If you would have told me coming into the season, what's more likely? The top 6 just carrying the bottom 6, like in an astonishing way, or the bottom 6 decently outperforming the top 6. I was like, well, it's obviously like you have Doc is back, Suzuki and that line are great. It's going to be them, but it's not. Again, we're going to get to Suzuki and Doc later on. Jake Evans' line is at a 57% goal share. The Dvorak and rookies line, which is essentially the 4th line right now, is at a 55% goal share. Goaltending, yes, Primo had one brutal game. Beyond that, Habs goaltending, I have basically no notes. If you take out that one game, then we're talking which is the Bruins game, the second game of the season. We're talking about a save percentage around 915, probably 920.
Yeah, Jordan, 909 through 6 games. That's definitely above league average. Like that's a good number to be at. Sam Montembeault's at a 932, killing it. Caden Primo, that one bad game, like you said, he's at 862, but he played well against the Islanders. It was not his fault they lost.
And then the other piece is special teams. Like, second on the penalty kill, and I know it's super early, but 12th on the power play, over 20%.
Yeah.
Again, 6 games into the season, goaltending's been pretty decent. Special teams has been surprisingly good, certainly outperforming and not where I would expect them to finish. But if you're telling me penalty kill finishes 15th in the NHL and power play finishes 20th, I would think that's more likely than not at this point after what we've seen through 6 games. And I'm going to get flamed for this. I thought they had some pretty darn good scoring chances against the Kings. And if you look at the numbers on Natural Stat Trick, the Canadiens had more high danger scoring chances than the Kings did. They didn't capitalize. There was a big Kirby Dach chance. I think there was a big Suzuki chance. Certainly Josh Anderson missed a couple. He doesn't have, not that he ever had great hands, but they have become completely non-existent nowadays. I thought there was an okay performance in there against the Kings if 1 or 2 goals go in when it's 1-1. But the game slowly got away from it. And that's really the story that we saw it also in the second period against Pittsburgh. They played really well. And then before you know it, it's 5-3 because they fall apart in the third period. A legitimate point of criticism is the consistency through 60 minutes, which I feel like is something we've talked about for the past couple years, but that you would expect it. My last point on, I understand why people are panicking, but maybe reel it in a little bit. I'm going to rattle off some numbers to you. Brian, you're a smart guy. You'll figure out what I'm talking about. 22, 22, 20, 23, 23, 21, 30, and 34. That is the age of the defensemen on this team. If you take away Matheson and Savard, there is less than 400 games of NHL experience on this team. right? It's Barron, Gooley, and Jacky account for most of it. Struble has about 50-something. And then Hutson and Mailloux have played nothing. Mailloux, by the way, looked all right. He got killed on shot share because of who he was paired up with. But he did the right thing that we spoke about last week about knowing your role. He knew when to pinch into the zone, find that open space, and get his first NHL goal. So congrats on that. The team is incredibly young on defense.
Yeah, they are.
So it makes sense that they're screwing up a lot more.
And that's why team defense was a part of this, of my portion of the headline, that it's losing us important games. Now, the important games thing aside, team defense has been bad, but you'd kind of expect that when they're this young.
Yep.
I did say earlier that it's the veterans too, but often the veterans are paired with a young defenseman, or they're on the ice with a forward line composed of two rookies. So there will be those times where even the veterans have trouble, but I think you're absolutely right that kind of caking it in this idea that young defensemen are going to make mistakes, it sort of makes this stuff passable. Now, the stuff about scheme, because I want to address that too, because I think that's absolutely part of it. That's not really excusable if it's from a coaching perspective. And this week, we're not going to talk about it in the panic meter later, but one that I considered throwing in was Martin St. Louis as a name for the panic meter. Not because I think because like me, certainly I'm not getting down on Martin St. Louis. Jordan, I don't think you are at all. You're shaking your head no, so that's not the case. But the fan base certainly is, at least on Twitter, on the socials that I'm seeing. Like, let's give him a bit of time to coach a team that's now jumping from rebuilding. So he's going from a kind of teacher to a coach in terms of mindset. Let's give him some time to adjust to that. And also, I don't think that it's entirely his fault. I don't think it's the defensive coaching either, like the assistant coaches who run that. Like, I don't think that it really has to do with that so much as it takes time for young defensemen to understand a new scheme as well. So it's not just that the scheme is bad. It could just be that there's a little bit of a disconnect, or it's taking some time for them to accomplish what's being set out for them. I want to address Mailloux as well. Congratulations on your first NHL goal. It was an absolute beauty. You played I think a great game. Some lapses, as you said, Jordan, but all in all, young player, rookie, that's okay. And then Hutson, I want to address as well. Over 30 minutes in the LA Kings game.
Yeah.
Unreal. And the way that it happened, unfortunately, Mike Matheson gets hurt, leaves the game. He doesn't come back for the second period. After the first period, he's gone. And it's not Caden Gooley that takes the brunt of the ice time for the defenseman. It's not Arbor Jacky. It's not Barron. It's not any of these guys. They all got an uptick. But Hutson played so phenomenally well, and it also helped that the Montreal Canadiens needed a goal. So who are you going to put out there? The guy who produces offense. Hutson played 30 minutes and 5 seconds. That's second all-time for a rookie Montreal Canadiens player. The first was from like the 50s, 35 minutes something. I forget who it was. I looked at it this week. But Hutson, second all-time in that. Over 30 minutes played, Jordan. He made a play at one point in the LA Kings game that was very impressive. He got beat by one of the LA Kings forwards with a nice deke. And rather than trying to like swing his stick around poke check, he just puts the body in front of him and gets basically football tackled. The helmet, he gets de-helmeted. Gallagher also got de-helmeted like within a few minutes of that happening. But all in all, I thought Hutson was phenomenal, and he really is one of the biggest bright spots on this team.
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about Lane Hutson over the past couple weeks, and since this is doom and gloom time, he will not be too much a part of the conversation, but he is... I don't know, man. Like the stuff that Patrick Roy and the Islanders were saying on Saturday of like, we're going to treat him like we treat Cale Makar because we just went up against Colorado. I was like, oh, it's real. Like
this is real.
I am still like, I don't know. Something is stopping me from getting my hopes up too much. Still the fact that, you know, we're several weeks into the season now, but like,
you know what that is, Jordan? I'll explain it to you. You're a Montreal Canadiens fan. That's what's stopping you from being able to enjoy this because we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
I talked about Matheson going down. He came back for the next game, but Gooley's out. Slavkovsky's nursing some type of shoulder thing. So, like, just on the injury front, there's that whole thing that life is bad to us.
Let's get positive for a brief moment here. And we have two more headlines we wanted to get into, although one might be clouded in a bit of pessimism, but let's do the most positive one. Headline number 2, career year incoming, Jake Evans. Holy smokes. Look, he has been essentially a 30-point-ish player around that for the past 3 seasons. He's always been strong on the penalty kill. We have always trusted him as a face-off guy. This is, while the numbers have really not shown up too much just yet, he just has 2 points in 6 games. This is the best I think he has looked offensively in the NHL thus far. And I think adding to that, it's the best he's looked as an NHLer, as a centerman. For all intents and purposes, he is the third line center now. You can look at the numbers. He's getting about 3.5 minutes more at 5-on-5 than Christian Dvorak is these days. And they did pair Dvorak with the two rookies, so it kind of makes sense to kind of demote Dvorak, but also it's still, you're demoting Dvorak, but you're also giving him a bit more responsibility. You have these two guys, play it safe with him, but nonetheless, Evans has become the third line center, and he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, potentially related to having a great start to the season. What have you seen so far? Because we just said Lane Hutson has been probably one of the best 5 players. Obviously, Samuel Montembeault and the guy who keeps scoring every game would also be in that top 5. Evans is in there, right? So far?
Absolutely. Defensively, he's been the best player. At least in terms of the eye test, Jake Evans has been the best defensive player on the Canadiens this year. I think he has been for a long time, just in terms of consistency. Yes, the stick goes hot and cold in terms of the offense. He'll have a stretch where he makes ridiculous dekes and scores 2 goals in 4 games and gets a bunch of assists, and then he'll go cold for 6 weeks and get 1 assist. But that's all fine because every single night he shows up defensively. Penalty kill-wise, he's been fantastic. He's been like that for years, and he's a big chunk of the reason why the penalty kill is working so well, why they're at 90%.
Yep.
Because Jake Evans never takes a shift off defensively. The faceoffs have not even been phenomenal. He's 41-40, just over 50%. Usually a little bit higher than that. But even so, when he loses a draw, he's a very intelligent defender who will go to the puck carrier if he has to. He'll cover his man if he has to. He's not one of those guys that I was alluding to earlier that has, misses coverage. He's always covering the guy he has to be covering. He's always in position. And I'm thrilled that he's getting more ice time than Christian Dvorak because despite him being this defensive guy, you're absolutely right. Even offensively, Jake Evans has been performing very, very well. The numbers don't reflect it. Like you said, 2 assists, on pace for whatever that is, 27 assists. But the goals will come too because he's put 6 shots on net. Some of them have been really nice chances in the slot. Jake Evans, overall, phenomenal year, buddy. 28, he's in his prime. This is Jake Evans, right? This is his game. This is how he plays. He's been great. I don't have any stats to back it up, Jordan. I saw this was your headline, and I sort of just wanted to go from the gut because I've always loved this player. I'm thrilled he's playing so well. He's a really important piece of this team, too, when you talk about, I know Dvorak is the one with the rookies, but Evans allows for the rookies and the defensemen to take chances when they otherwise would not be able to. When he's on the ice with Hutson, Hutson knows that Evans is going to make up for his, if he wants to run up and join the play, Evans is going to go, okay, I'll sit back, buddy. Go have fun.
Yeah. Jake Evans has an incredibly unsexy assignment every single night. He is the first guy over the boards on the penalty kill. He is taking defensive draws. He is, and we've been talking about his point total. I mean, they've played very well so far, his line mates, and Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson. Those guys have a very difficult time putting pucks in net, just because of where they are at in the stage of their career. I am convinced with the amount of chances that they've created with more talented wingers, he would have more points by now. It's just sometimes those guys just don't finish. From a face-off perspective, I do want to mention a couple times this week, he did the intentional lose the face-off to try to clear the zone in a defensive zone draw. It backfired one time, but that might be skewing it. But that's just points to how smart of a player he can be. I had a couple questions for you because yes, he's been great. I know you love him. You tried to squeeze him into our Habs MVP discussion last year, and I will never let you live that down. So,
defense is important too, Jordan.
It is. I got a couple questions about him, and we don't have to spend too long on it. But there was a moment last year where we were considering, what if we throw Jake Evans at wing in a top 6 position? I want you to hold on to that thought for a minute because we're going to get to Kirby Dach in a bit. What I want to ask instead is, he's an unrestricted free agent. The Canadiens would have to re-sign him to a competitive market deal. What do you think the odds are? Give me a percentage of him being back next season on the team.
45%.
Okay. I think
it's sub 50.
Right.
But not considerably. And Owen Beck is a big reason why. If we didn't have Owen Beck in the pipeline and if Kapanen weren't performing the way they have been, I'd say 85%. Those two guys cloud it because they're probably ready next year to take it at the very least a 4th line role, maybe a third line role that Jake Evans is in right now. And the fact that I think Dvorak is definitely gone means that you probably want one more veteran. Like, you want one guy who's in his like late 20s. Suzuki's almost there, but
yeah,
I think your bottom six, you need one smart, responsible, like aged veteran. Jake Evans has been here forever and has been a big part of why this team hasn't been last every year, but is fifth from the bottom. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it'll depend on what type of contract you would want, because I think he has the inside track to being the third line center again next season, even if Owen Beck is ready.
Yeah.
I do think Dvorak is gone. I think most people do. So there will be a spot open. Whether or not Kapanen can take one of that spot as well, I don't know. But also with the way that Doc has looked, if Evans is looking for like a 3-year deal at like a, I don't know, $3 million a year, then that's something I think the Habs would absolutely consider. I think he can get a lot more money though. So I think that'll be the bigger risk of someone wanting to sign him to a 5 or 6 year deal.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be more money per year, but somebody would sign him for his, because.
And I don't know if the Canadiens, like, the other way of looking at it is like he's great. He's a 30-point-ish player. Is that the third line center of a Stanley Cup champion? I don't know, really. So
It depends on your identity, Jordan. It depends how importantly you define matchups. You define this line that's going to go up against the McDavids, the Matthews, the McKinnons, because Jake Evans does that and he does it well, and Suzuki does it too, but you want Suzuki to score goals. So if you deem that crucially important and you want to keep giving him 15, 16 minutes a night in that defensive role, definitely worth $3 million. And definitely worth giving a few years. One more thing I've been saving for the end to throw in Jake Evans' favor. He's third on the team in hits.
Wow.
So it's not only the defensive stuff. The forechecking has been awesome. And I'm sure a bunch of those have come on the penalty kill, because he, like Anderson, if he's the closest guy to getting that puck, he's going to race down the player who's fetching it and hit the crap out of him. 14 hits so far in 6 games. He's behind Slavkovsky and a guy I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to save that.
Okay. Final headline, Brian. What do you got?
Final headline. There is some pessimism in this, you are right, but I'm going to start with the optimism. The headline reads, Caufield can't do it alone. Cole Caufield has had a very impressive start to the season, Jordan. He's been the most consistently implicated player on the first line when you talk about offense. Probably just globally when you talk offense, he's the most consistent player. Evans on defense, Caufield on offense. That's the way I've seen it. And he's got the goals to prove it, right? 6 goals in 6 games. A shooting percentage of 30%. Both of the Canadiens' victories so far this season were clinched by a Cole Caufield game-winning goal.
Yeah.
We all knew that Cole Caufield was going to have an uptick this year, in goals specifically, but just in play, right? He's aging, he's getting better. We all knew he would return to his namesake, Cole Caufield, and he'd be one of the more prolific scorers in the NHL. But who had Cole Caufield not only being a goal-per-game player, but also being first in the NHL in goals? A little caveat there, I do not count Kucherov, as he's only scored 5 on an actual goalie. 2 of his were empty netters in the same game, so buzz off, you clown. Caufield's in first. Now, I'm sure we all agree this is like a super crucial thing right now, a very positive element right now for the Habs. Our sniper is sniping. Life is good. But the headline does read, Caufield can't do it alone. In the first 6 games, he's outscored Slavkovsky, Suzuki, Doc, Newhook, Armia, Anderson, and Gallagher put together. Of course, we're only 6 games into the season, so that's going to even out somewhat as we progress into November, December, and further in the year. But Caufield is the only player in the top 6 who's contributed consistently in goals so far. There's some reasons why these other guys haven't, right? And we should get into those. I mentioned Slav's shoulder recently. 2 days ago, I think the video came out, 2-3 days ago, something like that. The video came out of him taking a kind of unassuming wrist/snapshot in practice and then really heavily favoring his shoulder. It hasn't stopped him from leading the Canadiens in hits, though. I will say that in Slavkovsky's favor. He's still been throwing the body around, which is great. But in terms of scoring goals, you need that shoulder to be, I think, able to pivot without pain for you to release a very NHL caliber shot. Suzuki's had a very slow start. That's another point here. Like the guys around Caufield that haven't been performing in the goals category. He's shown more as a playmaker so far this year. Yes, he's taken some decent shots on net, but nothing like the seeing eye wristers that we saw in the past. Yeah. And then there's the side of things that the second line just flat out is not working.
So let's hold on to that for a moment, because we're getting into the everybody other than Caufield we're about to get into. So to keep it on Cole for a second, because I recognize, yes, I mean, what a start to the season he's had. He's scoring from the same spot. He was almost in disbelief when he got that game-tying goal on Saturday night. What's it's really awesome to see after, we have to remember last year, yes, he ended up finishing with 28, but man, he had a cold spell where he was stuck on 19 forever. And I don't know if there was some type of breakthrough that got him eventually from that 19 up to 28. And now he started this season absolutely on fire. It's really awesome to see. From a team-wide perspective, yes, that first line is struggling. If not for Caufield, it's interesting. The first line is struggling, but when you look at their points, I believe combined between the three of them, they have 17 points in 3 games.
Yeah, they're on pace for that 70 points thing, Jordan. More than that.
It's really interesting. They're struggling, but it's primarily because Caufield.
Yes.
We've talked about with Evans, we've talked a little bit about Montembeault and Hutson, and Gouldie's probably the 5th guy. Those have been the 5 best guys so far this season. All due respect to Brendan Gallagher. It's been Gouldie, Hutson, Montembeault, Jake Evans, and Cole Caufield. Those are the 5 guys that are making this team almost at NHL 500. So we want to celebrate those guys just a bit.
Yeah, 100%. I would say definitely the vast majority of Suzuki and Slavkovsky points have been passes to Cole Caufield. Or passes to someone else who eventually passes to
Absolutely.
Caufield. So I left one other guy out of the discussion so far. I mentioned Gallagher. He's got 2 goals. That's great. They were both in the same game. He's playing well. That's great. He'll score some more. But I left one other guy out of the discussion when I listed players that, Caufield has more goals than. Partly because it kind of goes against the headline. Caufield can't do it alone. But Emil Heineman has been sniping too. He's got a lethal release. We've seen that in years past. His issue was more getting to the dangerous areas, and he's starting to do that more and more. He's cutting to the inside, and he's getting lost in coverage behind. So he's got that lethal release. He's found the back of the net twice so far. He scored a ripper in the shootout versus the Islanders on Saturday night. That was an absolute beauty, just streaking in, taking the shot, taking what he gives you. That was great. Heineman being on a 27-goal pace to start the year is massive for this team. You don't get into a wild card spot during a rebuild unless some young players on low ice time roles overperform. And that's what Heineman is doing to start the year. But that's not all. He's second in hits behind Slavkovsky. That's who I was saving, Jordan, here. He's contributing on the forecheck also. And he's forechecking super smart, very hard, the way he always did for the Laval Rocket. He's 100% my pick for the most deserving player to get one of the 2 power play units. If Marty wants to change those up, he has the shot for it. That's obvious. He's a more natural offensive player with better instincts than I think some of the members of the second unit. And Marty just flat out needs to shake things up in order to give Heineman a chance. I think that there's other players in this lineup that Marty has been taking ice time away from, /benching, /not giving interesting roles in certain situations. I like the fact also that he's able to reward other players when this happens, and Heineman is top of the list of guys who I think deserve that reward. So Caufield, Heineman, keep sniping, boys, keep carrying the offense. Literally those 2 players having more than half of the Montreal Canadiens goals by, I think, 2 or 3. So keep it up, boys. You're playing fantastically well. Do you have anything to add on Heineman? Anything to throw back Caufield's way? Some more praise before we get into the really sort of...
I promise this would be doom and gloom, and we've been too happy for the past 10 to 15 minutes. The one thing on Heineman, I will say, it's really great to see because we have to remember, when he came over to the Rocket a year and a half ago, he had that crazy sniping streak where I think he scored, 6 goals in 6 games to start his professional North American career. At the beginning of camp last year, we thought he was going to be a good chance to make the team, but he got hurt, or he was hurt. He didn't start the season. He took him a while. He started injured, and then it took him a while to get going a bit with Laval. So it's really nice to see him properly, continue to mature and be a fairly good contributing player. He's earned a spot on the team for sure. Okay, let's get depressed. Part 2. So Brian, you called this a panic meter. I don't like that terminology, especially in October. So I'm going to call this a concernometer, which is much more dorky.
That's the dorkiest I've ever heard.
If it's a 10 out of 10, sure, it's panic. If it's at a 5, I'm concerned. If it's at a 1, it's why are we even talking about this?
Okay, right.
So that's kind of how I view it.
Right.
So we're going to go over, these are going to be player specific. I had to kind of bully Brian into not making it team wide, but we absolutely could have done some team-wide stuff, but I think we already addressed mostly the team defense stuff. Yeah. So we got 5 players I think we wanted to go over. Let's start with the top 2 centers because we've teased it out enough. Let's start with Nick Suzuki. I had initially put this down as Suzuki's finishing specifically, but I think, other than his face-offs, which have been pretty good, I think there's been a lot lacking in Nick Suzuki's game, specifically at 5-on-5. He is dead last on the team with the 27% goal share, so expected goal percentage at 5-on-5. Dead last on the team. Dating back to last year, he has now gone 12 straight games without scoring, which would be his longest streak over the past season and a bit. Last year, he had a 10-game streak, a 9-game streak, and 6 twice. So if we're going combining season over season, it's at 12 now, but 6 to start the season. I will say he did start cold last year as well. He went 6 games without scoring to start the season, so it might just be Suzuki taking a few games to rev up. But overall, and this can be, I think, maybe a bit more of a general commentary of how the first line is playing, and that I certainly believe that's how it's intended. Last season, the Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Caufield trio had a 51% shot attempt percentage and a 51% goal share, which is not like outlandish, but when you consider how bad of a hockey club they were playing on, that's actually kind of impressive, especially at multiple times last year, they were the only forward option. Those numbers are down from 51% to 35% this year. That's where the concern comes from. I'll give you my number in a moment, Brian, but what do you think about Nick Suzuki? And again, it's Suzuki specific, but it bleeds out to the entire first line's performance.
I'm having a hard time with this one, Jordan, because I'm not at all concerned, and perhaps I should be. I think that's the thing. Like, I think my number sits around a 2, probably a 3. I think I would probably give my number for Nick Suzuki specifically a 3. When you're talking about the whole first line, it's probably maybe a little more than that because the Slavkovsky injury stuff, that doesn't help. But I want to talk about Suzuki specifically. The finishing. I'm glad that you removed the finishing aspect from this because it's not only that. It has to do with what he's doing all over the ice. But it's not that he's not trying. He's third on the team in shots on goal. So it goes Caufield in the one spot, obviously. Brendan Gallagher, who takes a ton of shots because he just happens to be in front of the net causing trouble all the time. I love that. He has 17. And then Suzuki's next, tied with Armia for 13. Kirby Doc's right behind with 12. So, but like, and that's good. That's a good thing. But what's great about that thing is the shots attempted. His total shots attempted, 18. He's 13 for 18. That's 72% through percentage. So that's a positive element. He's not shooting into bodies. He's picking his spots, Jordan. And I think that when you're picking your spots, the puck's going to go into the net. Last year, I think the year prior to, he had a ridiculous shooting percentage that was kind of over the top in terms of what you would expect from a responsible center like Nick Suzuki, who's not just a pure sniper, right? High 20s for most of the season is not a normal thing to happen for a player like Nick Suzuki. But the fact that his shots are getting through at the very least, like when you look at Brendan Gallagher, 17 for 27, Caufield, 20 for 31, the through percentage is really not there. Josh Anderson, I'm not even going to talk about the defenseman because Mike Matheson's is hilarious. I think we all know what it is. It's less than a third of his shots actually get through. So that one's obvious. He shoots into knee pads all the time. But to get back to Nick Suzuki, the finishing aspect, I'm not that worried about that. Caufield's been doing the finishing for that line, and yes, the other two have to contribute. I kicked a lot of this discussion off earlier when talking about Caufield can't do it alone by saying, Suzuki and Slavkovsky have to contribute too. But in terms of concern, I'm not that overly concerned.
So here's one thing I did want to push back on that. Nick Suzuki scored 33 goals last year, and he has not looked dangerous at all this season from a goal-scoring perspective. And again, 6 games is a small sample. I completely agree to that. But you score 33 goals last year, and he has not looked like a threat at all, really, so far. And the other part I wanted to, and this is not me pushing back on it specifically, but in terms of the first line of itself, like my number for Suzuki's 5. And again, I think that maybe bleeds over into the entire first line's performance. Our criticism of Suzuki and Caufield and player X was always they're too much of a rush chance line.
Right.
They don't have sustained offense. Unless it's with Kirby Doc, there was no sustained offense. Enter Uri Slavkovsky, and they became, yes, they still had the rush chances, but they were able to have sustained offensive opportunities and shifts in the offensive zone because they were able to do better cycles. A lot of that was Slav's work. They have lost that. They've returned, even with Slavkovsky, back to being a rush chance only. So they'll go in, they'll get their chance, and that's it. Then they're chasing the puck the rest of their shift.
Yeah, mostly dead.
So like those are the two parts that are messing with me. That like I get it. It's 6 games. He has not looked dangerous at all. There haven't even been opportunities where you're like, oh, he was so close. Like he's getting shots, okay, but I don't know how many of them are true, like legitimate scoring chances at this point. And the other part is maybe that's also because they're just I mean, look at that. It's the shot attempt percentage. It's 35%, down from 51. Like, they're just not in the offensive zone for a long enough time to get good scoring opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Jordan. I want to say one other thing about why my number's so low, because 5 is probably more reflective of how the fan base feels than 3. Your number, I think, is better encapsulates that. I said it last week, I'll say it again. He starts slow. Nick Suzuki starts his seasons slow. He's done it his whole career. And I know his career is relatively short, only a few seasons, but that's the way he works. He starts slow and he builds, and then by the end of the season, he's like close to point per game usually, and that's what brings him up to the, close to 82 points that he's gotten last year, a little less the year before. So I think that's another reason why I'm not overly worried. The other thing to sort of, I guess, concern yourself with is that with Evans taking the brunt of the defensive responsibility against top lines this year, which I think he will because he has the line mates to do it. Brendan Gallagher was always that guy with Phil Danault. Anderson is showing a defensive edge that he hasn't shown ever in his career. Like he on the penalty kill overall, he's been great. So that line's going to get a brunt of it. Nick Suzuki then loses that all-important responsibility that he had, and his value as a member of the team, I think, decreases because of that. And I don't mean that he's a less valuable player overall so much as I mean that if he's not doing that and he's also not scoring, what's the contribution? So that's the other element here that can be not panicky, like I'm not panicking about it, but it could be concerning. And perhaps it's just that the Montreal Canadiens have not played teams yet that have that. I mean, they played Toronto, and they played pretty well on opening night against Toronto, but opening night against Toronto often is an outlier where we just beat them usually. But he hasn't had the opportunity, I think, to face off against top-end talent. And then the game against Pittsburgh, I wasn't thrilled with the way that he matched up against Crosby. I will say that. And against Malkin. Like, they outplayed him. So that's the other element to this. As poorly as I just said all of that, and as confusing as it might have sounded, but Suzuki's offensive flair has to be there when the defensive isn't, and the opposite is true too. So if he's not contributing in terms of goals and just sort of getting a lot of secondary sort of assists or assists to Caufield, he has to be contributing defensively too. I want to bring this all back. Is it a lack of effort with this top line? Not Caufield. We've addressed that. Caufield's been everywhere. With Suzuki and Slavkovsky, is there something of a lack of effort here? I know Slavkovsky's nursing an injury, so maybe that excuses him. Is Suzuki nursing something? You know what I mean? I don't like speculating about what could be going on when there hasn't been anything obvious.
I think what we're seeing is how much Slavkovsky stirs the drink of that first line. And he has not been, even from preseason, as good as he was last season. I'm saying that he has a goal and 4 assists or in 6 games. Like I'm really complaining about
a goal
nothing.
And 5. He's point per game.
He's point per game, and I'm complaining about him. But it's because the underlying numbers, which are usually a better indicator of like long-term sustained success, because they have been poor for the entire line. I think that's what it is. I think it's Slav. Like there's so much skill in Caufield and Suzuki. Like Caufield has the shot, Suzuki has the vision. Slav was the guy that was able to keep the puck in the zone, and he has all that other stuff too. Like he should be the best guy on that line.
Yeah.
And it's okay. He's 20, and maybe he's a little banged up. You're right. We shouldn't speculate. But I think maybe that's what we're seeing is, Slav's not up to the pace that he was at last year. Again, 6 points in 6 games. Maybe I'm just sounding ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, even Suzuki, right? 5 points in 6 games, 54% from the faceoff dot. It's not like he's been useless out there. It's just, it's not to the level that they were at last year, and that's where the concern comes from.
Right. I think you're 100% right about that. I think I'm very glad you said it. And I think that's the actual beam of sunlight. I joked before that one goal against the Kings is a beam of sunlight, but the actual beam of sunlight here for this line specifically is that even when they're not playing that well, they're still at a point per game as a line. Suzuki has 5 and 6, Slavkovsky has 6 and 6, and Caufield has 7 and 6. So even like Caufield's been playing amazing, I'm putting him aside, but even the other two being basically at a point per game when they're not playing well. Now, what a lot of people think is that, okay, that means that when they are playing well, they're going to get rewarded even more and be 2 points per game.
But it's not even about that. It's about, like, let's say they just keep the same pace of goal scoring, but we're spreading it out a little bit better. But the advantage is, like, sure, they'll score the same amount of goals, which is great. If they're scoring a goal a game, it's fantastic. They're going to be less in their defensive zone, and they're going to give up less goals, and people are going to be less tired. Like, that is part of, like,
100%.
They might score, like, 8% more goals than they currently have because Caufield's on fire. But it's the whole game becomes better because those guys are on the ice 20 plus minutes a night.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right, Jordan.
Okay, let's move on now to the second line because the other guy I wanted to talk about was Kirby Dach, which look, let's add the context, which maybe is bad for a panic meter segment. Kirby Dach went a year and a half without playing this much consecutive hockey. He has not played this many consecutive hockey games since March of 2023, when you really think about it. So does it make sense that he's going to be rusty? Yup. He's at this point, if you're including preseason, played close to 10 games, if not more. I think he played quite a bit in the preseason. So it's fair to say both, I think. They do not have to be mutually exclusive commentary. Yes, he is rusty and he's allowed to have time to shake it off. But also, yeah, he's looked bad. And the numbers show it everywhere. The second line stats are worse than the first lines. They're at a 32% shot attempt percentage, 35% expected goal percentage. Individually, and this is the most damning stats, Kirby Dach, the possession monster from his 2023 season, was at 49%. Again, that's the 23 team. That was even worse than last year's. He's down to 31% now.
Wow.
That's almost a 20-point drop.
Yeah.
Expected goal share is down from 48 to 37. Not as big of a drop, but still a pretty big drop. So again, maybe we start with just Dach and then we extend it to the wingers on the second line, because I do think it's not all on Kirby Dach, but there were some expectations, maybe wrongfully, that Kirby Dach coming back would completely shake up the top six, because we remember how good he was a year and a half ago. My number's at 5 for Kirby Dach because I'm trying to stay patient. What about you?
My number's at 4. I'm staying patient as well. The fact that he hasn't played in a year, and that extends to the whole line. I think if it's just Kirby Dach, at the risk of sounding boring, I think it'd be a 3 as well, same as Suzuki. Because I think that the players around him, Armia's not suited for that role, just flat out, frankly. Like, he played well last year to close it out. I think he's had good games and bad so far this year, somewhere he's belonged, somewhere he's not, but he's not a consistently offensive threat. Newhook either. Newhook has been, I'd say, less than ideal in terms of the eye test offensively. But Kirby Dach, I think I'm going to keep this really short. I think we just got to give him more time. I think by the 20 game mark, he's going to be at the very least like 80 or 90% what he was at his best a year and a half ago. And to me, that's good enough for a guy coming back from having not played all season. So like, I think that's all I want to say about it. I'm not that concerned. I said 4. I am going to go to 3. I'm going to be boring. Suzuki and Dach, the top two centers, my concern-o-meter is even less than a concern. It's a 3.
So my question is, how long do you keep patience with Dach in that line before messing with it? Before being like, hey, Emil Heineman, he's playing great. So is Oliver Kapanen. Before you consider opening up one of those spots. Because like I think we all agree we're not going to touch the Evans line. For now, we might want to eventually, might have to eventually.
Yeah.
But let's keep that third line intact. The idea would be one of Heineman or Kapanen taking the winger spots. And let's keep the first line as it is. So you have somewhat limited decision making until Patrick Laine returns, which is the big.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be great if Dach could like shake off the rust and get a bit of a groove going by the time Laine comes back. I don't know. Who knows? I hope it happens. But at what point do you say, okay, it's enough patience. We now need to proactively make some adjustments
this week?
Yeah.
Not at the expense of Dach, let's be clear. I think that you have to give Dach, and I know Marty didn't play Dach in the shootout, and that was kind of damning. That was like, you got to step it up. And that's a message that I assume will be well received. It's a quote-unquote important game that I mentioned before. The Islanders and the Montreal Canadiens are both on the bubble this year. That's sort of the expectation. The Islanders have a much better shot, don't get me wrong, but that is one of those teams you would have to beat out in order to get a wildcard spot, or likely beat out. So not playing Dach, that was a decision by Marty. But Dach is not the one, I think, at fault here, nor is the answer to put Dvorak on the second line that I've seen a lot of. Grant McCagg and a bunch of other people this week were saying, put Dvorak on the second line. That is a colossal mistake. Colossal mistake. Dvorak is not even a third line center at this point, in my opinion. I think he had a better week than the first week. I think he was okay in preseason. Better than I was expecting, still not great, and definitely not a second line center. I would put Evans on the second line more quickly than I would put Christian Dvorak on the second line. So that's not the answer. But putting Heineman in one of the winger roles and shaking things up in the bottom 6, maybe that's the answer. The difficulty here is not that it affects the top 6. It's not that it affects the second line, because I think that would actually benefit them. Like, if And that's the other question. Is it Armia or is it Newhook? Which one of them would drop down? The eye test tells me it's Newhook. Logically, it should be Armia because Armia is more of a possession forecheck guy anyway, and you're getting that back with Heineman. I think it would be too much of the same if you replace Newhook with Heineman, and Newhook is not well suited for a fourth line thing, which is that's where he'd be going to play with Kapanen and Dvorak.
So ultimately what's happening here is there's an audition once again for the fourth winger spot in the top six. And what you're saying is Patrick Laine's hopefully coming back mid-December, early January. Someone has to earn that spot now. We thought Alex Newhook had the inside track. We thought Josh Hua in the preseason might have a chance.
Which, side note on Hua, looking good in Laval. So
yeah,
a call-up could be in store if they don't figure it out. Sorry, back to your thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's where we're at. I think you might have to break up the Evans line. The truth is, like, you might just have to keep moving things around and find other combinations that work. Hopefully Josh Anderson's in a spot now where he understands the assignment of what he needs to do. I think he does.
Yeah, he
does.
He's getting it.
So yeah, anyways, I think that's enough on Kirby Dach. We have 3 left. I have 2 more I wanted to bring up, but you had one specifically you wanted to bring up. So please present why you think this player needs to be part of the panic meter.
So I think you misunderstood why I put this player in here. It's not a Montreal Canadiens player yet, though I think we would all like him to be right away. Ivan Demidov. I didn't put him here because I'm panicked, Jordan. I put him here because the fan base is still panicking. Despite the fact that he has gotten more ice time, that he's looked good in the games where he's gotten more ice time, I put him here because I want to quell the expectations of this fan base. And I'm gonna jump right into my number. If you're cool with that, I'm putting this at a 2.
I'm at a 1.
You're at a 1. Great.
Yeah.
So I put this here exactly for that reason. Not because I wanted to be like, holy crap, this is a 7. We have to get Demidov out of Russia. The Kremlin's right-hand man is ruining his life and making him not play minutes. The part of that that's true is that he's not getting the ice time he deserves. He should be in the top 6. He should be getting tons of power play 1 time. He's the best player offensively on that team very, very often. I'd say in most games. The thing that's not true about the I guess the fan base's panic level about Demidov is that he's extremely young. 1 year of playing less than he should is not going to ruin his career. It's not going to turn a potential 100-point scorer consistently into like a third line guy who just can't figure it out in the show. Let's all settle down.
Okay. I'll completely agree with you. My number's at a 1. He has 10 points in 17 games, playing 10 minutes a night. It seems like he's been unstapled from the bench last 2 games, 13 minutes and 9 minutes. He scored again. He picked up an assist.
Yeah.
So a couple more things. We figured it out, right? Why this has happened. He turned down a contract extension.
Yes.
And they seem to not take that well. I mean, unsurprisingly. I mean, first of all, it shows that Demidov really wants to come to Montreal, which is fantastic news.
Oh, yeah.
And also it was reported on Saturday night by Elliot Friedman that the Habs front office is planning on going to Russia to meet with Demidov. So fantastic. Great. Yeah. He'll be over before we know it. And like, if it provides Habs fans some solace, look, he's at 10 minutes a game. I think that'll tick up. It's like this little stretch here where he's getting 3-4 minutes a night. It's going to be over. They must realize eventually that he is one of their best players, and maybe he might end up averaging 12 minutes a night. That's okay. He's age 18. He's playing in the KHL. We know from what we're watching with Mr. Lane Hutson right now that if Demidov earns his time next year and he's playing well, he's playing 18 minutes a night.
Exactly.
He'll play 15, 16 minutes a night.
Great point.
MSL will not be afraid to be like, nah, I trust this guy. First power play, 16 minutes, 18 minutes. Like, they'll still try to insulate him, but we're seeing it with Hutson, where it's like, no, he got a couple years of development. We're cool. Like, dive right in.
Yeah.
You've earned it. If Demidov has earned it next year, he'll play on the team next year, and he'll get 18 minutes if he deserves 18 minutes. St. Louis is not one of these like backward-thinking coaches a la Michel Therrien, where it's like you have to earn your stripes and all that. If you're good enough and you play hard and you work hard, you'll get your time.
I'm glad you said that,
Demidov's at a
Jordan.
1.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I was saving the visit and the contract thing as the sort of cherry on top, icing on the cake that I was going to mention last. But I'm glad you brought it up, because those are probably the 2 most crucial things in this discussion about the Habs front office having the right idea about Demidov and really caring about his development, despite what a bunch of people were saying at the start, not understanding, like, hey, get him out of there. Why are they not trying to? Relax, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And then the contract thing. That is the explanation. Like, we know now why he was getting no ice time. He was getting slighted because he didn't want to sign for 3 years in the KHL. And thank God for that. Why don't we jump to the defenseman? Because neither one of us is panicked about Demidov at all at this point.
So I was thinking maybe just for the sake of time, maybe we can just combine these two players.
Yeah,
because I do think it's a similar story being told. So the last two guys we want to talk about are Arbor Xhekaj and Justin Barron. I don't think that should be a surprise for anyone that's watched the game so far with what we expected of these guys who are now both in their third season in NHL. Both, I believe, just hit 100 games in the NHL as well this past week. Let's start with Xhekaj. I think overall, my number on these two, if I'm combining them, is a 6. So it's the highest I've been so far. I'm a little bit higher on Xhekaj in terms of concern than I am on Barron. People in the public might see it in another way. Let's start with Xhekaj. I think Xhekaj almost rattled himself in the preseason. He didn't have a good preseason regardless, but I think that's because he was. And by the way, when we spoke about it, all this preseason nonsense about the fighting, how many fights have the Canadiens had through 6 games? 0. Yes. It was complete nonsense, all this stuff. He took himself out of the preseason and they just, both their advanced stats are fine. They're both 47, 48, 49%. When they've been paired together, they're actually pretty good. It was around 49% in terms of shot attempt percentage, 45% goal share. Eye test wise, the two of them, I don't Barron's a bit better. Xhekaj is the one where I look at him oh, I don't know what we're seeing. If everyone is healthy, Goulet obviously is out now, but if everyone is healthy, Xhekaj is not part of the 6 guys that are dressing for me. I don't even know if he would be the 7th guy up at this point. I don't know, and the Mailloux stuff, Mailloux being right-handed certainly helps, and Savard hasn't even looked good so far this year. We haven't talked about him at all, but he looks like he's lost a bit of a step. I'm still concerned, despite all of that, despite the fact that there are clearly opportunities for Arbor Xhekaj. MSL decided on Saturday night that he was getting scratched and that Struble was coming in and Mailloux was getting called up and playing, despite the fact that only one guy in Caden Goulet was injured. So I definitely have concerns about Xhekaj. It's higher than Barron. You can go with either of them. What have you seen out of them this year, and what is your concern with them?
So I want to jump in first to the reason that Struble was brought in over Xhekaj when Goulet went out. I think that there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. Look at their ceilings and look at their defensive acumen. Struble is a far better defensive player than Xhekaj, flat out. He's a much better breakout. He's much better on breakouts, which is what the team's been lacking lately. So that sort of explains it. Goulet's a good breakout guy, very good defensively, great all over the ice. Struble's a similar thing, just a lower caliber version. Xhekaj isn't that guy. He wasn't going to take the place of Goulet even a little bit. So bring in a guy who's more responsible in that way, who still is a physical presence, but doesn't fight when he doesn't have to, and he's just better defensively, flat out. So that explains that. In terms of Xhekaj, I think he did rattle himself. I'm putting this at a 7 for Xhekaj and Barron. This is definitely, you're at a 6. It's your most panicked. This is my most concerned or panicked, whatever you want to call it. And it's mostly because of Xhekaj, less so because of Barron. But with Arbor Xhekaj, it's making me call into question myself. And that might be why I'm the most concerned, because for 2 years now, the joke on the socials, or the stone that's thrown, especially by Ottawa Senators fans, but all rival teams of the Montreal Canadiens, the stone that's always thrown when we're being positive about Arbor Xhekaj is you have an AHL defender in your team and you're excited about it. That's basically the crux of what everybody else says. And I'm starting to see their point. That's the scary thing to me, Jordan, is that perhaps we were overvaluing him. And I even hate how this sounds coming out of my mouth, because I am generally trying to be, we both are, very positive about the Montreal Canadiens. And I do love Arbor Xhekaj. This isn't that I don't love him as a player. It's that I think we may have overvalued his offensive and defensive abilities because we were so enamored with his physicality. So we were finding excuses for when he was bad, and we were choosing to see the flashes as consistency when they weren't as consistent as we thought. Is there validity to that, or am I spiraling?
No, I think that's spot on. I think we may have overvalued the intangibles and be oh, he scores a couple goals here, he can do so. I said, look, it's not like he's dead, right? It's not like he's going to be in the ECHL for
maybe I should have
opened
week. With that. Is that even though right now he's playing like an AHL player, that's not his entire career trajectory, and there's that big asterisk that he could still improve in these other ways too. It's just right now I think we had overvalued.
And look, what we don't see is we don't see everything that goes on in practice and the training sessions, but we do see how players are utilized during games. And I want to contrast this a bit with Justin Barron. We have seen Jack Eye a couple times this year kind of get stapled in the third period to the bench because it's not working for him in that game. With Justin Barron, first of all, Barron has been getting penalty kill time this year. He didn't really get that last year unless someone was hurt. With Struble back, I want to see how this changes, but in theory, there's an open spot on the penalty kill, right? You still have Matheson and Savard are in theory the first two over the boards always. And last year, we have to remember it was Gulli and Kovacevic. And I want to bring up Kovacevic in a moment, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, Gulli's obviously still on the penalty kill. It's who's getting that fourth spot. And so far, they've given it to Barron, and Barron was still there because Gulli was out the other on Saturday night. I'm curious to see if Barron's still getting that fourth spot if Struble is healthy. Because, so first of all, like they see something in Barron, right? Where they're like, we're going to give you penalty kill time. Like that's something that you have to take care of, right? And if Matheson gets hurt, we know that the new power play 2 quarterback becomes Justin Barron. And the other part, and this could be absolutely a point of criticism on St. Louis, what I mentioned earlier, Barron had a bad couple shifts in that third period against the Islanders. Most coaches would have just benched Justin Barron for the rest of the game. But again, maybe there's what I'm point is like, I think they're seeing something in practice, in training, in video sessions about Barron from an eye test perspective that they're not seeing with Jack Eye. Right. So like I initially had these separate, like I had Jack Eye at 7, I had Barron at a 5, I ended up going with the 6. Like I think there's a little bit of something there. Like they clearly still believe in Barron a bit more than they do with Jack Eye. It could be the right-handedness.
I have an explanation for it as well, Jordan. It's the ceiling. Justin Barron still has top 4 potential. Arbor Jack Eye doesn't.
Right.
So if you're trying to train these guys for the positions that they're going to be in, top 4 defensemen play the penalty kill. They just flat out do. If you're good enough to defend for 20 minutes a night, some of that is on the penalty kill. And a lot of it's at 5-on-5 where you're getting most of your ice time. So I think it's just a ceiling thing and a floor thing. Let's just be flat out. Like Barron, I think his floor is at least as good as Arbor Jack Eye's. And you're not wrong that the right-handedness helps him.
Last bit, we regretting the Kovacevic trade yet?
Regret's a strong word, but damn, Kovacevic looks good. I think we talked about him quite a bit when he was traded to say like we undervalue this player. He's worth more to the Canadiens than we all think he is. We're going to suffer because of this. It's not only come true, but I think it's even more so than we thought. Like Kovacevic was such an integral part of that defensive core, being a veteran. He's one of those guys that we got off of waivers that was so much better than the team that got rid of him thought. And we benefited, and now the Devils are definitely benefiting.
Yeah.
I regret's a strong word, but definitely we miss him. That's for sure. We miss Kovacevic on this team.
It's tough because you want to develop the young guys, and I went through like the age of everybody. And Kovacevic, while being similarly experienced, is a bit older. He played several years in the AHL. That said, like you have to balance between, oh, we have this guy on our defense because he's a stabilizing force versus, oh, we want to have this young guy develop.
Yeah.
And in theory, Matheson and Savard are supposed to be the stabilizing forces, and Gulli kind of like graduating actually like from young guy past stabilizing force to net positive, and then Hutson just like Spider-Man jumping in right into that top level, like skipping everything and going to the top. And I feel like the big struggle has been the third pairing, and what the hell do we do with it? Struble looked okay-ish on Saturday night. Patience with that. He was out for a couple weeks. It's just it's been a bit herky-jerky, and you do wonder like, okay, like if Kovacevic, like the alternate universe where Kovacevic is still a hab, then that means there's less opportunities for some of these other guys, and like we're playing the long game here. Ultimately, like it's better for the Canadiens to have some growing pains right now with Justin Barron, with Logan Mailloux, with Arbor Jack Eye, with Jaden Struble, rather than, despite the fact that he's probably a better defenseman right now, Jonathan Kovacevic playing 60 to 70 games for this team.
Yeah, that's well said. It's the forest from the trees again, Jordan, as you started this whole discussion off with. It's knowing that getting them games this season when we're not making the playoffs probably allows them to be better in a season when we are.
Yep. All right. So hopefully that was enough depression for everybody this week. We will hope the Canadiens have a couple W's next week so we can flip the script a little bit. That'll do it for this week's episode of This Week in Habsland. We'll be back next week to hopefully talk about some wins, some positive stuff, hopefully some first goals of the season by Nick Suzuki. You can follow us on social media at Habsland Pod, primarily on Twitter and TikTok. And if you like what you heard, feel free to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Until next Monday, go Habs.